Howdy, Rex here. So we've gone over some of the real basics of cartridge reloading. There's a lot more to it than we've covered in this part of the video series. I could go into this for weeks and weeks and months if I wanted to, but unfortunately we got to get rolling. So I'm going to direct you guys over to another guy who does a really good job. There's lots of materials out there of different guys who really covered reloading in great detail. One of the guys is Ammo Smith. I ran into him a couple years ago online there, and he does a real good job. So if you're looking, if you want more in-depth reloading information, I'm not going to offer it in this series. I might do a separate series later on getting into a lot more detail for long-range cartridge reloading. So as far as load development and details like that, look elsewhere. You're going to find lots of good information out there. There are several things that I do want to discuss before we get finished with this internal ballistic section on cartridge reloading, and those are some of the important points that are going to be important for long-range precision shooters like us. We're doing extreme range, and there's a couple critical areas you want to be aware of when you set up how you're going to do your loading and how you're going to do your load development particularly. One of them is in component selection. We talked, I think it was part 7, about vibrations and harmonics in your rifle, and you're going to want those to be as consistent as possible. So one of the reasons for that is point of impact shifts, like we discussed earlier. You want the smallest groups possible, right? So obviously if you have a more consistent harmonic wave, that's going to give you a less point of impact shift. Another thing to consider that we haven't got into in detail yet, but we will real quick here, is muzzle velocity variation. And when we're doing our component selection, that's one major thing you're going to need to consider, because it is possible to get extremely tight group sizes and still have a pretty good variation in muzzle velocity. And that can happen. A lot of times they're synonymous. You get tight muzzle velocities and you also get tight groups, but it doesn't always work that way. So when you're doing your load development, one thing you're going to want to definitely keep in mind is that although your group is small, you're going to want to verify on your chronograph if your deviation between the different velocities is small as well. Because a small difference in velocity is going to translate to a big point of impact shift way far downrange. You won't see that at 100 meters, but at 1,000 you definitely will see that, particularly in your vertical dispersion. So that's something to keep an eye on for sure. And where that relates to component selection is not only do you want your primers to be consistent, we discussed a few good primer choices like CCI, and your bullets, obviously, you're going to want those to be consistent as well. We talked about the importance of selecting one bullet that's going to work for everything and sticking with it. You don't want to be changing up bullet sizes or bullet makes. For example, if you're using a 168 grain Hornady boat tail hollow point, and you switch over to a Sierra, you might experience some differences in muzzle velocity or some of the frictional dynamics because of minor shape variations in the bullet, different metallurgical components, right? So those things are going to make a big difference. So you're going to want to pick one bullet and stay with it. Even if you pick one bullet and stay with it, you might find a big advantage to getting bullets in large quantities. Like this is for my 300 grain, these are my 300 grain Sierra Match Kings here that I use for my 338. And this is a box of 500. If you can afford it, I would highly recommend doing that, because you will find differences between lots sometimes. So for peace of mind, when you're doing your component selection, do that. Now, different bullet makers, for the most part, even the cheap bullet manufacturers do a pretty good job keeping it consistent. You can weigh all your different bullets and verify that they're the same weight, because although you might not see a huge difference in your shot pattern at 100 meters, the muzzle velocity difference downrange might be bigger too. And you might even get a similar muzzle velocity at 100. So if you want to weigh your bullets before you load them, some guys do that. I don't see a need to do that. Sierra seems to load them very well. Hornady, Sierra, most of your major brands, especially you're talking about long-range precision bullets designed for that purpose, already have really good strict quality control. So I've actually never seen a need to do that for the bullets I've selected. However, if you're not sure about a bullet that you might be using and you want to verify, you can go through and weigh those. Another thing you want to pay very close attention to is your cases. That's probably where we're going to have the most variation, and that's probably what's going to cause the most amount of problems. There's huge differences between different kinds of rifle cases as far as brands. And for example, like we said before, we mentioned this before, you don't want to mix different brands together. Winchester, Remington, Federal, they have different thicknesses, they have different hardness and softness levels. They're loaded, they're constructed a little bit differently. They might have a different shape to how the inside of the case rolls out, or where you have the primer pocket, that might be to slightly different specs. And those little tiny differences in your case dimensions will translate to huge differences. So you want to be very, very fussy with your cases. And when you're selecting your ammunition, like we talked about before, trying to keep it to the same lot number, that's actually where you can run into most of the problems, is you can have huge differences, particularly in the case dimensions. A lot of guys weigh cases. So you'll buy a whole bunch of cases all at one time. You want to verify that they're all the same make, at least. You don't want to mix the different brands. But after you get them, if you're going to use one of the more common brands like Winchester, Remington, Federal, those, you're going to probably want to weigh those to verify that you don't have one that's way heavier. That could indicate there's more thickness. That could be a big problem. It's not going to, like I said again, when you're doing your load development, you might not see it in your shot dispersion, in your group size, but it will make a difference in muzzle velocity. You're going to have different case capacity, is going to translate to a different muzzle velocity, and that'll cause a big problem downrange. So that's just kind of the tactic of choosing how you're going to approach your load development, is don't only aim for getting small group sizes, but pay close attention to your muzzle velocity variations as you're doing that as well. Another thing too is, so when you're selecting, or when you're searching for that perfect load, you've already selected your projectile a long time ago, hopefully. So you've got a bullet picked out that you're going to find that's going to be the most efficient and constructed for your applications, right? And you're going to want to now find the powder charge, the optimal charge weight for whatever powder you're using. There's a lot of different ways to handle that. I'll go over just a couple of the methods real quick here and give you some pointers on how to approach that if you're totally unfamiliar with it. But like I said before, Ammo Smith or some of the other various sources you'll find online or in books are going to give you a pretty good indication of how to do this as well. Okay, so we should probably discuss the harmonic wave pattern in relation to load development. Now, we discussed this in a lot more detail earlier, if you remember the harmonic section. But when we're talking about load development, you're going to be looking for a powder charge that is going to cause a harmonic wave that's situated in such a way to where it has already reverberated off the muzzle area, and the wave is going to be back towards the rear of the action. At that point in the harmonic wave, your muzzle should be relatively stable. That's when you want your projectile to exit the muzzle. You're going to have the least amount of shot dispersion that way. So what you're going to do is you're going to vary your powder charge with your given projectile until you're going to be using the target and your group size to kind of indicate where you have the wave located up here, the most of vibration up here, or back here. And you'll see that in your group placement pretty easily. Different powders, there's going to be loads that are kind of noted to being particularly accurate for a given bullet weight, or a given bullet and a powder, okay? For example, some guys who use a .308 caliber using 4064 powder are going to note a particular weight and a certain length barrel to be an accuracy load. And that's a good place to start when you start your load development. The reason that is generally speaking more accurate is because, and it varies with the barrel construction and weight obviously, but the wave vibration is going to be towards the rear of the rifle at that time the bullet exits. So that's kind of what's going on there. That's why there's accuracy loads that guys kind of use a lot. It's going to vary slightly for each different rifle and ammunition combination, obviously. So you're going to want to verify that. So what I would recommend is there's two different ways you can accomplish this. There's a ladder method, and then there's a more scientific method known as the optimal charge weight method. And that's basically cutting past a lot of the trying to search for that zone and just going straight to it based on the harmonic patterns. I'm not going to take a lot of time to explain that on my videos. That would take quite a few videos to thoroughly explain that, so I'll just post in the link here, or in the description of the video down here, a link to a website that kind of explains that. And if you want to do the optimal charge weight method and just cut straight to the accuracy load and refine it that way, that's a good way of doing it. It's good and efficient. Another way, that the classic way of doing it, has been the ladder method. And that's where you start, you look in your manual, it'll give you different powder charges for your different bullets, and you're going to start at the bottom, and you're just going to load up a few different cartridges in each powder increment. So you're going to load one with the minimum charge, then you're going to work your way up a certain amount. I like to actually use half grain increments at first, 1 or half grain increments depending on how wide of a zone you have to work with. And I usually like to load 5 cartridges in each increment, just to get a good feel of exactly how those 5 cartridges are going to work out. If you only load 2 or 3, you might not get a good representation of what that's really doing. So 5 really nails it down. If you got a real small group with 5 shots, that's a good indication that's a pretty good powder charge for that. So you work your way up in a ladder, and you're going to see certain areas where your group opens up, and then when you approach a different area, you're going to see where the group tightens up. Okay? So what I would recommend, if you're doing the ladder method, is do that in half grain or 1 grain increments until you get it narrowed down. Then go back to the lab, the reloading lab, and start over again and reduce your increments this time. Maybe reduce it to 0.2 grains or a tenth of a grain is what I usually do. So I usually get it within a tenth of a grain increments once I get it zeroed in. And then you do the same thing. You load 5 in each increment, and you take it out and you verify on paper. And like I said before, you're going to want to also keep an eye on your muzzle velocity variation. If you have 2 groups, one's a tiny bit larger than the other one, but the muzzle velocity variation is way less, it's way tighter muzzle velocity variation, so you might actually want to go with that one, even though the dispersion is a little bit bigger for our purposes. For target shooting at 100 meters, obviously you would want to go the other way, but for our shooting discipline, we're shooting really far, that's going to be a big problem at long range. So look for your tight muzzle velocity variations, and you got to kind of use your brain power to figure out what's going to be a good balance between those two, obviously. So that's a good way to do that. And you can refine that too. You can look, most reloading manuals will list the accuracy loads for any given cartridge and powders, particular powders that work good to try. So, and you can look online, a lot of guys will share that information. Be very careful though, if guys are giving you load information, to verify that in some kind of book that you're not like over max. You never ever want to go over max load if you don't have to. Unless you really know what you're doing and you have a really good reason to go over max load, I would never do that, because like I said in the videos before, we're going to be adjusting for our drop with precision, so you're not going to actually get that much advantage to loading real hot. It's not like the flat trajectory is going to help us out that much, because we're going to be adjusting for it precisely. What else do we got here? So we talked about the ladder method, okay. Oh, a lot of guys go out to the range and start their load development immediately after break-in. That's probably when you want to do it. You don't want to do it right out of the box. During the break-in process, you can use those rounds to not only break in the rifle, but you can sort of get it on paper. You can have your scope mounted and be dialing it in. Now, mind you, you're going to have to tune that once you have developed your load and everything's done. So you'll have to retune it later, but you can start walking it in, getting it close. So before you start your load development, though, you're going to want to make sure your barrel has been fully broken in. One of the 2 methods we talked about, depending on what you're going to use. And you're also going to want to make sure that before you start your load development, you are at full powder and copper equilibrium. If we were going to be doing more match style shooting, where you're sitting at a bench rest type applications, might be different. You might want to have a perfectly pristine bore if that's the way you plan to go to the range and start your shooting. You know what I'm saying? However, for most real-world applications like this video series is designed for, where you're out in the field, you might be taking several shots over the course of a day or more, or if you're varmint shooting, or if you're doing tactical shooting, or whatever you're doing, 99% of the time, your bore is not going to be pristine. It's going to have fouling in it. So you want to do your load development under the same bore conditions you would anticipate using that rifle in the field. You know what I'm saying? So you always want to train like you fight. You want to do your load development like you fight as well. So same bore conditions you anticipate having. For most people, that would mean a bore that's at least a copper equilibrium for our purposes, and you want to have at least a couple powder fouling shots in there if you've done your minimal disturbance cleaning maintenance right before you went out to the field. So before you start trying to do your load development, a lot of guys will notice the group's starting to shrink up, and that is because their barrel got the fouling equilibrium established again. So it wasn't because it was a better load, it's because their barrel finally stabilized in its dimensions from getting the fouling in there. So that's another thing to be aware of as well. And like always, with this reloading, everything you're doing, you're going to want to make sure everything's absolutely consistent, particularly your cases. You're going to want to pay close attention to those, all your charge weights. So whatever you're doing, make sure everything's very, very consistent. That's going to be the main thing. Another note too, when you're doing your load development, I would strongly recommend not doing it on one of those bench rest mechanisms. I forget what they call them. I never really used one. But you're going to want to confirm your accuracy and confirm these things when you're doing your load development. This in a similar method to how you'd be shooting in the field. So sandbags is a great way to go. Use sandbags. You don't want to have the rifle mounted to something solid. That's going to change your harmonic pattern quite a bit. So if you zero a rifle and do all your load development where it's attached to some kind of machine that pulls the trigger for you and it's mounted solidly onto a bench and it's going to vibrate slightly on that bench, that's going to change stuff. So you want to do all this confirmation stuff, and when we get into how to zero our rifle, you're going to also want to do that the same way you anticipate using it in the field. So when I do my load development, I lay down on the ground with the sandbag under the toe and a bipod deployed. I do because the harmonics will change depending on how the rifle is deployed, and that is the topic of our next couple videos. Proper rifle deployment to minimize not only your point of impact shifts, but your well, basically your point of impact shifts. So stay tuned for that one. It'll be fun, I promise. So I'll catch you later. $890 confirm.
Green light.
Hit.
Oh, you got it! Holy cow, you got it!